once again, G. Michael Vasey with another edition of the magical world of G. Michael Vasey podcast. And today I have pleasure in talking to a fellow Hullonian, i.e. someone from the city of Hull in East Yorkshire of England. Peter Whittaker is an author and he's written a number of interesting books. I read his opening trilogy, which was based on the true historical events with some fictional characters around the 1066 timeframe in England, which culminated in the successful Norman invasion and the start of William I's reign. But Peter also has written some books about topics in novel fashion that I find quite unusual and very compelling. He also writes a blog which is well thought through and doesn't pull any punches when it comes to some of the key issues around today. So I wanted to talk to Peter and find out what motivated him to write about topics like eugenics, euthanasia, and this kind of thing. And that's where I started the interview, asking him how come it was that he wrote about that sort of topic.
I think basically it's because I've grown up as a disabled person. I was born disabled, grown up as disabled. And as I got older, I've become more and more aware of how differently I've been treated through my life. Mm-hmm. And yet, a lot of the time, it's things that the way people like me are treated are also things that nobody wants to talk about. And it's kind of like living in a world that nobody wants to acknowledge exists. And it's not so much like the usual disability rights thing. It's just trying to get people to confront disability, and it's not just disability actually. I'm thinking, because I've realised now it's just prejudice basically. It's just people have prejudices to things, and it's not necessarily just disability at all. It's just that attitude that people have that they don't want to talk about these subjects. They just want life to be nice for them. And also the rise of like political correctness, where now people won't even mention that I am disabled when they're talking to me, even though it's obvious I'm disabled. And they try and skate around the subject. And sometimes I find it quite funny, to be honest, the way, the lengths that people will go to not state the obvious.
We live in a strange world where people do avoid certain topics, and I think increasingly people are afraid even to raise certain issues. Discuss things or observe I just posted on Facebook, that criticizing someone like Jordan Peterson for talking about common sense. I don't quite get it. Common sense is called common sense because it is common sense. There's no argument about common sense. It's either common sense or it's not. Just because it doesn't agree with your ideology doesn't make it less common sense than it was before. You obviously I've spent a lot of time researching topics like euthanasia, and I noticed on Facebook, and I apologies, but I can't remember what topic it was, but you were going to tackle another particularly open wound. What's the next book?
Sorry, it was the book. I think the book you're referring to was the one about eugenics.
Eugenics. Sorry. Yeah.
And the next one is going to be about euthanasia.
Right. So I've got it back to front.
But I'm working on that. And partly that's one of the reasons why I've written about that is partly because my own immediate future is something I'm going to have to consider, because my condition will get worse as my muscles age and become less efficient. Also, because Donna, my wife, is a hospice nurse and she deals with death nearly every day that she's in work. And she has seen people who, quite frankly, they're not living, they're just existing through medical intervention.
Yes.
And they have no quality of life. And sometimes she finds it very upsetting having to treat these people. And because more than one of them has actually managed to tell her that they just want to die. But the current social situation is, you can't. We will keep you going for as long as these machines and this medicine will allow. And it's like lost the choice of whether, in fact, they don't have a choice. That's what the law states at the moment. You do not have a choice to end your own life. And we just seem to prolong misery.
So in writing these books, you're more trying, I feel like you're more trying to just educate people
Yeah,
about the issues and the other side of the coin and so on. And I think that's really an interesting way to go. The problem is selling books is difficult, as I think we both know.
yeah, definitely.
You can write the best book in the world, but unless you already have a name, it's
Yes.
pretty difficult to sell a bunch of books. And of course, I got to know you through the 1066 trilogy that you wrote, which I thought was absolutely wonderful. And I'm going to ask you the same question. What was it that got you interested in that particular period of time, 1066, and made you go ahead and do what must have been a lot of research to write those books?
Yeah, it was actually very trivial. To York for the day, and we was driving back to Hull, and we went past Stamford Bridge. And when we was in York, there'd been like some people dressed as Vikings walking around advertising the Jorvik Centre.
Yeah.
And I just remember saying to my wife, I find it quite curious, really, that York is all about Vikings, when just as we go past Stamford Bridge, said the Saxons defeated the largest Viking army ever to set foot in England, and that's not mentioned in York. And it's actually actually on the doorstep of York.
Right.
And she just said quite flippantly, "Well, why don't you write a book?"
Oh,
And so,
really?
and that's where it started actually. And I just thought the more research I did, the more fascinating I found it. And because I didn't know about the Battle of Fulford Gate, which was the first battle, it's hardly ever mentioned in the history books. And yet it was the Battle of Fulford Gate that forced Harold to march north to face the Vikings, which of course is then what led to William the Conqueror invading the south.
Yeah.
And it was just discovering all this, how one even pretty trivial decision by two lords who were looking after their own egos rather than doing their duty to the people, deciding they can fight a battle and they lose it, and they lose it very, very badly, and endanger the entire kingdom in the process. And it's like a falling dominoes effect I could see in the history,
Yes.
which led up to the Battle of Hastings, of course. And I just got lost in the research as well. I just found it. I didn't know a lot about the Saxons, and I just found them very fascinating people.
They are fascinating, and I don't know if you're aware of a book called Way of Weird, Weird with Wyyrd,
Yes.
by
Yeah.
Brian Bates. Are you aware of that book?
Yeah, I think I've looked at it a couple of times. I don't own a copy, but I've
It's
looked
one of
at
my favourite all-time books because
yeah,
the story there is that the one of the kingdoms is Christian, and they send not a monk, but he's on his way to becoming a monk. They send
mm,
him on a mission to find out about the pagan religion, the other side of the border, and
yeah.
so he comes under the guidance of a shaman who
All right.
he ends up teaching him shamanism, and at the end of the book, he's able to reconcile actually Christianity with the pagan side.
Yeah,
But it's just an incredible book, and very well worth reading. So
yeah,
next time you see it, if you can afford to pick it up, pick it up.
yeah, yeah.
You'll find, I think you'll find it absolutely fascinating. And the battle around York was which one? Remind me, because I want to
Um,
make sure I don't put my foot in it here.
Fulford Gate was the one that happened immediately outside of York,
Hmm.
and Stamford Bridge is about 10 miles away, I think it is. But so it's within what it was certainly within walking distance for the people of the time.
I think
Um,
it's Stamford Bridge because my father used to tell me a lovely little story back when he was a teen. He was an avid cyclist and used to escape from Hull with his best mate
yeah,
Jack on bikes every weekend.
yeah,
And they would take a tent. They'd bail out of work on a Friday at school or whatever and spend the entire weekend away from, where they lived in Coronation Street, not one of the nicest places.
yeah,
And and one evening, he tells me that they happened upon Stamford Bridge, and it was getting dark, so they decided to camp the night. And they put the tent up and got into bed and so on. And they were woken up about 2 o'clock in the morning with what they thought was a thunderstorm.
mm,
But as they began to listen, they realised that actually what they were hearing was horses' hooves and cries and screams and
Wow.
clash of metal on metal. They spent the entire night sort of shaking, literally unable to open
Yeah.
the door to see what was going on outside. And so they feel like that particular battlefield is haunted,
Yeah.
or felt like it, because they're both passed away, obviously.
Yeah.
But it was a very good little story of.
So, yeah, I've had stories before about people who live near battlefields who report hearing and seeing strange things. Yeah.
Have you any interest in the paranormal at all, or spirituality, or anything along those lines?
Donna certainly has. So, by association, I have with it. I mean, I'm not convinced about ghosts so much. I do think it has something to do with energy, though,
Hmm.
because I have seen some strange things myself that I've not been able to reconcile with anything, with reason, basically.
Yes.
So I'm open-minded on the subject. I'm not convinced about some of the, like, on what you see on popular TV, their versions of it. But I do think we leave imprints of energy, and what we can mistake that for, well, not mistake it, but we can interpret that to be like a ghost if it's an image,
Yeah.
or ghost sounds if it's like just sounds that you hear. I remember a story about a pub that was very old, and they believed the stones had absorbed sound vibrations, and under certain circumstances, they would release it. The stones release the sound back,
Uh-huh.
and people sat in this old pub were convinced it was haunted because they were hearing these sounds. It was like people talking like they did 500 years ago.
Good grief.
So people
Yeah.
could hear the voices, but they couldn't understand clearly what was being said because it was being said in the language of like Shakespeare's time, which
Yeah.
people today find quite difficult to understand. And that one always fascinated me, that story. And again, I think it has something to do with energy and energy being released. So I say 500 years later from these stones that had absorbed it, that made up
Right.
the walls of the pub.
Yeah, I think energy is right description. It's all about
Mm.
energy. It's what I
Yeah,
do, wandering around looking for earth energies and
yeah,
energies of the Slavic gods and that kind of thing, which is a
yeah.
lot of fun. I was going to also ask what motivates you to write, because you've actually been fairly prolific. I mean, you're turning out quite long books that require quite a bit of planning, I would assume, fairly rapidly. So, what is it that motivates you to write, and what is your approach to writing?
I think I used to write stories for my friends when I was younger, short stories mostly. I think it was just fun. It was just a bit of fun. But I've always been interested in literature anyway. And I say it was only that it was my wife basically being quite flippant with me that inspired me to write my first book, seriously sit down and write it. Although it
Hmm.
did take me quite a long time, I have to admit, because I didn't know the mechanics of writing a novel at all. And I had to learn the process as I wrote the book. But now I've got a technique that I suppose I've used it so many times, it's now become like second nature to me. I can sit down with an idea, and if the idea works, I get quite excited about it, and I want to write it.
Yep.
And I know the mechanics of devising a plot, developing characters, trying to find different ways of representing different scenes. And I find all that quite fascinating. I just lose myself in it now. And I suppose that's the motivation, really. I get lost in it and I'm enjoying it. It's an act of imagination as well.
Do they write themselves, or are they really planned?
Um, Mostly they write themselves. I do I do like a first draft which has very little dialogue in it, very little descriptive writing. It's just the idea itself, and I just pursue the idea.
Right.
And after, I don't know, about somewhere between 5 to 10,000 words, I know that this idea is going to work or not.
Right.
If it doesn't work, I'll just put it on the back burner and think about it in my own time. If it does work, I then start writing, really, making notes, creating a style sheet so I can record all the characters' names, descriptions, and things, and also start working out the main themes and the plot lines that I want to pursue. But again, it's the creative process, I suppose. It just becomes quite intoxicating, really.
Yeah, and in terms of character development, do you use people you know or have met, or do you try to make people up completely?
It's not conscious. The characters just seem to write themselves, and I'm sure that there are people, friends, and some of my relatives have probably recognised themselves in some of the characters. Yeah, but it's not a conscious decision on my part to do that. It may be that a character just seems to be working in such a way that they should have these characteristics, and I've pursued that, and then in retrospect, I might have spotted, that's a bit like so and so, and I don't know
Right.
how they're going to feel when they read this. But I've not had any complaints though. But yeah, I'm pretty sure they're a mix of my imagination and people I know.
Well, I must say the thing that struck me about the 1066 trilogy though was I read the first book, and it was one of those books where I was actually desperate to know what happened,
Oh,
in book two, because I'd so engaged with the characters that you'd written, and so enjoyed the story. And what I really enjoyed about it was the historical accuracy. You tried really hard, I felt, to be as accurate to, the history of the thing as possible. And so I felt like not only was I being entertained, but I was also learning about, that period of
mhm.
time
Yeah,
and some of the things that had taken place in that period of time. So to me, it was really an excellent book. And subsequently, I read the other two, of course.
yeah.
I haven't yet read any of your other books, but that trilogy I certainly devoured and would heartily recommend to anybody. I thought it was really, really good. It was the kind of book to me that I could see as a movie or a series.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
I love
yeah,
that.
I'm sure. But, like there's one I watched on Netflix about a guy that's raised a Viking but is a Saxon. What's it called? It's quite famous. It's shot in Hungary.
Oh,
The Last Kingdom.
oh, Last King.
Uh, yeah, and to me it was, I could see a Last Kingdom type scenario from your
Yeah.
books. So if any producers are listening to this, contact Peter immediately. You also write a blog, and again, you don't pull any punches in the blog. I've commented on a couple of the articles. Hope
Yeah.
you don't mind. But I really find that your articles are very intriguing, very thoughtful, and well considered. Do you? I tend to write my blog articles just like in the spur of a moment, but I'm guessing you do a bit more planning than I do.
Yes, it depends on the subject. Some of them are very much spared in the moment, but some of it, when I'm like touching on subjects like maybe to do with politics or social commentary, I do try and get my facts straight first. So I will take a bit more time over doing those. And when I wrote about climate change, I made a real effort to try and understand the science behind it, even though I'm not a scientist. It, I spent about 3 weeks at least just reading papers and trying to find alternate views. And I'll do that again with like social issues. I'll try and find out what the opposite view is to the bit I'm writing to try and anticipate any arguments really, and also
Mm.
to get a better understanding of the subject. But then I will write when it's about my own writing or when it's about a film I've seen or something like that. They tend to be more on the spur of the moment. I've
Yeah.
just got the idea, so I'll just write it quickly.
Well, you really impressed me on the climate change thing as well, because you plainly had a slight change of opinion, at least having done the research, I would say.
Yeah,
And I was impressed because I think most people, when they have a political affiliation or a political ideology, they're very unwilling to change or switch that position, even when faced with, and I think that's part of the problem of the world we live in today, is people are unwilling to change their mind because,
yeah,
and I don't understand this. It's like critical thinking has gone out the window, and everybody's hooked into some kind of ideology, and they just basically spout this ideology like a robot,
yeah,
without really thinking about what it is they're saying, what the consequences might be, and without ever really researching what the truth of the matter might be. Because everybody's got an axe to grind in this world. There's a reason why the media pushes certain points of view, and that reason isn't always the best reason for you. Doesn't have your best interests at heart.
Oh, true. Yeah.
And I've developed a little saying just recently. You may have seen it, that I think politicians are not so much in public service but in self-service these days, and I know that's something that you're interested in as well. Tell me a little bit about what you're trying to achieve with your parliamentary discussion group on Facebook.
Yeah, it's basically, it feels like we're in a situation where certain politicians, who may now even be in the majority, have successfully disassociated the electorate from what goes on in Parliament. And people seem to be having this apathy. Mm-hmm. They've got this apathetic approach to anything political. As long as they're all right, they really don't seem to care what happens. And I just find it very unsettling, because there's so many parallels to things that have happened in the past, where people, the electorate, have really basically just surrendered power to a small minority, and then just gone with whatever that minority of people have decided. And it's often, well, usually it ends in tragedy. And I can see things going that way in Britain. I mean, it went that way in America. It seems to have gone that way. And it can go that way here quite easily. And even when you've got a man like Boris Johnson, who has no moral fibre whatsoever, can be elected to be Prime Minister. And then I've actually heard somebody, working class person, saying, "Oh, you heard about poor Boris? Oh, gosh, he's got coronavirus. I feel so sorry for him." And I'm just gobsmacked. How can you be so naive?
I mean, I'll be honest. I went through college as a young conservative, and I've been, I'm an Aquarian, Peter. I'm always the opposite to the crowd here.
Yeah.
I get it. I guess that's just part of my nature. So I went being a young conservative, and I've grown up. I don't really consider myself to be anything anymore. I'm kind of, I guess I'm what the Americans would say. I'm socially liberal and fiscally conservative. So I like little government, but you do what you want. That kind of thing. Maybe a bit libertarian. And I haven't lived in the UK now for 30 odd years.
Yeah.
And I can't even understand how Boris Johnson is in the Conservative Party, because he doesn't look like a conservative to me. I mean,
no.
Some of the Green stuff he's doing is so far left. It's outrageous. And the only bit of conservatism that he seems to espouse is the I'm all right, Jack. That's what I'm looking for. The I'm all right, Jack stuff, which is the bit of conservatism I don't like.
Yeah.
Amongst others. So to me, looking in from outside, I'm with you. I think that something horrendous is going on in British politics, in that I can't actually differentiate much between the political parties or let's say the individual politicians that purport to represent particular political parties.
Yeah. And
that's disturbing, because if there isn't a debate or a discussion, then democracy no longer exists. It's just a free for all who can get the most out of it for themselves, essentially. And I think that is what's going on.
Yeah, and I think it feels like it's been leading up to this since the time of Margaret Thatcher, who created the "I'm all right, Jack" attitude, made it socially acceptable. It wasn't extreme then, obviously, but to me, it's always where the changes came, when people accepted it's all right to destroy a minor's community to achieve a political goal, forgetting that those are people you're attacking and displacing, and you're ruining their lives. And even like when we had Blair and Brown, supposedly Labour, things didn't change. We just became even more obsessed with money over everything, really. And money's got its place, and I'd like more money. Everybody would. But I've always been of the Brian Clough persuasion. I remember in an interview, this reporter was trying to trip him up, saying, "You claim to be a socialist, he said, but you live in a big house and drive a nice car." And he says, "Yeah, I do." He says, "But being a socialist means you want everybody to live in a big house and drive a nice car." And that struck a chord with me, not because it's socialist necessarily. It's more egalitarian.
Hmm.
And that is where my political leanings are: the equality of opportunity and treatment for for everybody.
Yeah.
Whereas now seem to be in a situation where it's basically a very powerful, very rich minority looking only after themselves, and they don't care what damage they cause to the rest of society. And the fact that we have like food banks now, I mean, that's to me just disgraceful. That in a society like ours, so about the fifth richest in the world, we have people who are dependent upon food banks.
Yeah,
And
so I mean, something's gone very badly wrong, that's
yeah,
for sure.
there's
And
no
it's not
social
just the
solution.
UK. I mean, it's everywhere. Here in the Czech
Yeah,
Republic, I think that there's still a very strong anti-communist, anti-totalitarian sentiment. But
yeah,
I think there's an equally strengthening, what's this capitalism thing? It hasn't done anything for us
yeah,
at all. And I actually would say there's nothing wrong with capitalism so long as it's done properly. And the problem with
yeah,
capitalism is that the people get greedy.
yeah,
The prime minister here and the leader of his so-called party against corruption is is a Slovak for starters, so it's not Czech, it's Slovak. Is a
right,
billionaire,
yeah,
and people voted for him on the basis that he's got enough money, surely he's not greedy.
yeah,
And I was telling people here, well, I've met a number of multi-millionaires and billionaires, and every single one of them, their only objective in life was to have more.
mm, yeah,
So I don't think that being a billionaire it stops him from being a corrupt individual. Well, now the guy's he's not under investigation. He's been convicted by the EU. He's under investigation in the Czech Republic for, basically taking EU money into his companies. And oh, it's so corrupt, it's
yeah,
unbelievable. Yet people here still like the man. And I'm just, what's wrong with you people?
yeah.
Why can't you see that he's just is in the business of self-service? He's not
It's
serving you.
yeah. You're right. It just seems to be the norm now.
Yeah, it's like people
Across all
expect it.
countries.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, for some reason, well, I suppose it's down to the media. The media have accepted it and they're portraying it as normal, and they're
Mm,
not picking it up anymore. Certainly, British journalism now it's a joke. It's
yeah.
not. Yeah, it doesn't exist anymore to be investigative. It's just there.
Journalists these days are basically these 24, 26, 28-year-old kids that have been indoctrinated in universities and no real taste of life at all.
Yeah,
And the old guys like me, they're long gone. So journalism is to me. I don't read any of the news sites anymore unless I have to, which unfortunately I do for my job, as I'm sure
yeah.
you do too. But I try to just avoid it because it's propaganda. There's no debate. It's just propaganda. I think anyway.
I agree. I don't really watch mainstream news programs on television anymore. I don't listen to them on the radio. I just try and find alternative views on the internet, and I
Mm,
usually try. If I read one story and it strikes a chord with me, I'll try and find an alternative account of it. Although what I have noticed recently is, well, actually, it's not so recently when I think about it. When Hull City were in the Premier League, I found a story about, well, an account of the football of one of their matches that had won. I think it was against Liverpool, and it was
hmm.
published in the Indian Times. And then I found the same article printed in an American paper, and that got me thinking. And then I looked into it. So many stories are just copy and
Yes,
pasted, and
yes,
there's no like investigation. They just take it and you
yes,
rerun it, and and it can be from any part of the world. And
yes.
it's like it's really difficult now to try and find an alternative point of view on a serious subject even.
And don't you think that's partly deliberate? Because I mean,
Yes.
the workness
Yeah.
is totally against any. I mean, if you think about climate change,
Yeah.
if you stand and question the current doctrine on climate change, then you're an evil person. You're a climate change denier. You deserve to go to jail or
Yeah.
some kind of punishment for not bowing down to the current party line, so to speak. And I think that that's become just everything. That there's no discussion. There's no alternate viewpoint. There's just the viewpoint, and if you don't
Yeah.
subscribe to it, then you're an outlier, and you don't deserve to be considered.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's why, I find your blog particularly refreshing, because I may not always agree with what you're saying, but I appreciate the fact that you're taking a balanced approach. You're looking at the evidence from both points of view, or all points of view, and you're coming to a considered conclusion that's as much based on your personal life experience as anything else. And your personal life experience and my personal life experience are two different things.
Yeah.
So possibly we will not agree on everything, because I haven't had the experiences that you've had, and vice versa. And it's okay to disagree.
Yeah.
We don't have to agree. We don't. That's the other thing about the modern days. They want everybody to be agree with the same thing. Well, we don't have to agree. It's okay not to agree. It's absolutely fine to disagree, so long as you're having a conversation about it.
Yes. And personally, I don't mind if somebody disagrees with me, because I will look at their points, and I'm not afraid to change my mind and say, I think I got this one wrong. And what you've said is pointing me in what looks like to be the right direction. And actually, I'd rather that happen more often than it does.
Yeah.
Because I'm well aware, like with climate change, I know my scientific knowledge is very limited. But what I have discovered is, like you said, I've gone online, I've tried to look at blogs, but so much when you read so many pieces so many times, you start to realize there's a pattern in them. They're all pointing in the same direction, like they're all been arranged to do that. And it's very difficult now to try and find it. And it's not just with climate change, I'm finding it with several other subjects I'm interested in, that it's like you say, the people are just indoctrinating. They're not challenged. They don't want to be challenged, and they don't want to stop and consider an alternative point of view. They just want you to believe this now. If you do stand up and say something, then you're, like you say, you're a denier. And very quickly all the personal insults come. No arguments, just personal insults.
Yes, that's how I find it too.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, I'm particularly impressed with you taking on sort of socially distasteful areas for creating novels or writing books about. I mean, it's not what others would do. It's those are things not to be discussed, and yet you're writing and planning readable creations about those areas, which are challenging, or should be challenging, the reader to think about it and reconsider perhaps their position.
Yeah, I was just occurred to me there, actually, the book on euthanasia. I'm not writing an argument that says euthanasia is right, just accepts it. The plan is to actually try and get people to think, and the main character is not going to be delivering a diatribe on euthanasia. Is somebody who's made his mind up, today will be my last day, and then explaining why it is through conversations with other characters that he meets, each one of which will bring an argument either for or against. But I'm planning on the conclusion being open.
Right.
So that the reader, when they get to the end of the book, can make their own mind up. In fact, that's what I want them to do.
And I think this is an unusual thing these days, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm not trying to sell a point of view. I'm just trying to get people to have a point of view.
Getting people to have a point of view rather than just spout something they heard or read or think is socially acceptable. That's where we need to get to again. And all power to you. So if someone was really interested in learning more about you, Peter, where would they go?
Well, I've got a wide social media presence. I've got my own website, petercwhitaker.co.uk, which links to my Facebook, my WordPress blog, Twitter, and things like that. So that'd probably be the best place to start, to be honest.
Right. And they can find all of your books on Amazon and usual places.
Yeah, they're also on the website with descriptions of what the books are about, with links to Amazon and places like that. Yeah.
So my thanks to Peter Whittaker for being a guest on the Magical World of G. Michael Vasey podcast for this episode. I hope you found it as enjoyable as I did talking with him. We did venture off a little into politics, but I hope you'll forgive us for that. In the meantime, if you'd like to know more about Peter, and I really can recommend the Sorrow Song Trilogy, the 1066 series of books, in particular as I've personally read them, you can find out more at his blog or website at www.petercwhitaker.co.uk. That's Whittaker with a single T. You can also find out about his books on amazon.com and amazon.co.uk. And all of this information is down in the bottom notes associated with this podcast, along with my own website and some information about some other bits and pieces that you may find interesting. So once again, thank you to Peter Whittaker, thank you to you for listening, and goodbye.
Thought of you every day, and then I thought